Hi, Kim. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Kim Aronson, excellent. I'm very excited about this conversation. You have many different, I'm going to call them talents or focuses or interests, but probably even lived lives within lives here. So, intuitive reader, author, you've experienced different. I kind of saw some of your bio in how we got connected was through a network of podcasters, but something with it was like a dating site in there, and then you have your wisdom group. So, sounds like you're very involved. And I'm just going to say, in the healing journey for and with other people, if that's a fair way to say it.
That's a good way to say it.
Okay, beautiful. So, where I'd like to actually start to kind of springboard is actually intuitive reading. There's such a depth to it. And I'd love to really kind of hear maybe either your story or where you center from. And what's really interesting is because I remember seeing that before we started. And I was going to say just one thing because it springboarded. And I kind of closed my eyes and just centered my voice before we jumped on here. And I said, kind of, is there something? I just kind of asked the inner voice or the higher self or whatever people view in that is. And two things came up. One was this image of a very tumultuous, like ocean scene where it almost gets the foamy, frothy on it. And not sure what it meant, but the other was actually was a feeling in like the solar plex in the yellow chakra and then the yellow kind of came up too. So that was interesting as well. So sometimes, if we get little downloads or insights, sometimes they're obvious, sometimes they're not. But you being an intuitive reader, I can only imagine where some of this is, if it's specific or a sense that you get. But without me continuing to rattle on here, I want to hand the mic to you and just kind of really pick up wherever you're kind of called to about that subject.
Well, thank you so much. I think I'll begin where what you were talking about. Intuition is, something obviously everybody have, and people use it more or less, but it is something that is just built in our DNA. And what you were talking about, obviously you used your intuition there, and some of the pictures you got is the pictures I get when I read people. It really very similar. I get colors and I get sensations. Intuition, I'm glad we're starting with that because for me, intuition has really been the foundation of everything I've done. I have studied intuition or psychic readings since 97 or 90,
Oh, wow.
I think.
Yeah.
I moved to Berkeley, California, and I started going there, not to the Berkeley Psychic Institute, but to a private trainer there. And way before that, I sort of always knew since I was very little that I had a sense of things. I just didn't know that people didn't have a sense of the same things. But I do remember being my brother, who is 3 years older than me. We shared bedroom, and I do remember sometimes he might be 10 and I was 7, and he said things to me, and I do remember thinking he must know better than that. I could just feel that he didn't have the insight that I have. I was just surprised, I remember. I also remember when I was younger, I saw people's aura, that were light. And I just didn't know that that was not normal. But later I could reflect back and say, oh, I could see something there. So I think I was very open from the beginning. I'm a very sensitive person like you are yourself. And that is always an advantage in a way of sensing other people. The disadvantage is that you have a lot of feelings and you have to deal with that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm from Copenhagen in Denmark, and I moved to the US in 97 to Chicago, actually, where you're from. And then in 99, I moved to Berkeley, California. That's when I started my studying. And there I saw the sign saying Psychic Institute, and I went there and I took a few classes. And that's when I realized that there were actually something you could be trained to be better at. So I ended up finding a person that I studied with and have studied with her for 17 years and in a group of people. And I learned so many things about being an intuitive reader. And there's lots of tools, of colors and sensations and auras and groundings and all those things. And that has been amazing for me. And I would just say that because I also teach in intuition, I try to teach people how to use the intuition. And I would say that it is something we can all learn. And people often ask me, how do you do this intuition thing? And I said, half of it is trust. If you
Yeah,
trust what you feel
beautiful.
and what you see inside, like you just said in the beginning, if you trust that that's valid, then you're halfway there. The rest is just techniques and practice.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Because, yeah, in intuition development, I mean, you're really developing that, and it's interesting too with the tools because I'm gonna kinda go off on the same subject, but I think that what happens too, and forgive me, I wanna come back to where we were at, but I wanna go out just a little bit where I feel like it's a little bit of a dark place for some reason, but being called to talk about it is I think sometimes people in what we'll label as like in the spirituality world or intuition world, I think they can there's modalities and there can be tools, but I've seen people get very caught up in the rules or turn it into, and if it's fair to say, a dogma and become dogmatic about it. And then the rule set is the only way to go. And the belief pattern is based on that. And if other people aren't doing the rule pattern, there's almost this kind of, it's been turned into a little bit of a structural scenario, which is interesting because you
Mm.
mentioned the trust, or if I may, I'm just going to use the word kind of faith in there in a form of trust. And, but reliance on the systems and the programs or the structures or rule sets. I don't know why I was necessarily called to talk about that, but it was kind of coming up because it kind of felt like there can be this pull on people's personal journeys where they seek out different modalities, which is amazing. I believe that we should play with things and should try things and explore these to see if they work for us because not everything works for everybody. Yogic practice or breath work and everything else. Like, it'd be nice if there was a one fit all, the secret key that does it for everybody. But I kind of I just felt a little bit called to kind of say that. So you worked with somebody for a very, very long time. So it was many potential ebbs and flows through that process of the learning.
Yeah, so let me just understand. So it seems like you're saying that you can be caught up in the tools instead of using
Yes.
yours. Okay, that's a great point. I actually never thought about it and never really run into it, honestly.
Yeah.
Probably because the tools that I call tools, and I'll give you an example, but it's really a way for you to just stay centered while you are reading someone else and not mix up the person's energy. So
Mm,
starting to read your reaction to the other person instead of reading the actual other person and their feelings. So
yeah.
separation is really important. And that's just one example. But for instance, the method I'm using is very well known in the intuitive and psychic world. A lot of people who know about this would recognize this. But one thing you, for instance, do, we use a rose as the symbol in the aura. You imagine a rose, the aura, at the edge of your aura. When you do a
Mhm.
make a separation between the person you're reading and yourself so that you don't get impacted by energy that comes from them when you tell them stuff. Because sometimes, and I do a lot, tell people what I see. I don't want to not tell them the truth. And
Sure.
so when I tell them something, sometimes they have reactions to it. They get upset or maybe they're disagreeing with that or maybe they get sad, whatever feelings that emanate from them. I can't really, I can't take that in because if I do that, um, it really makes my information less precise. So you have this kind of barrier put up in front of you, so you don't get all the emotions back to you so you can see them more clear. So that's just
Yeah.
one of the many tools. And when we're talking about tools, I was thinking, well, a hammer is a tool, right? And
Yeah.
it's a hammer. It doesn't have any agenda. It's just a hammer. You can use it to kill a person or put a nail
Yeah.
in the wood, right? So it depends on how you use tools, of course, and I guess that's what you're talking about. But in my training and my experience, the many tools over many years is really mostly for you just to use to be more clear about the information. Yeah. Is that
That's beautiful. Yeah,
okay?
it definitely answers it. I mean, that really touches on kind of exactly what I was hoping we were gonna get at. I think that's a beautiful way to articulate that. And the rose is a very interesting one too, because I think that there's can be things with, and maybe you have a different perspective on the word, because sometimes words are just words, but intuition, and then we get into being an empath or being allowance of absorbing other people's energies in that arena as well too. And I know that some of that does, and there could be different levels of the empath and the allowance of other energy, but I think that's really important because it can, I feel like, draw on us or really weigh us down if we're allowing of that, the other people's energy. So that's all I really can say
Yeah.
on that.
And that feel that happens all the time for us. We should be more aware of that every day, basically, because people's energy flies around and we have to be aware of how we are impacted by other people. I'm wondering if I should just tell a little bit more about intuitive reading and how there's
Please do. Yeah, that'd be
I-
great.
interesting for people to know. It's a little hard to explain. So if you don't understand, please just ask. But basically, the whole point of, at least when I do my readings and how I learned, is really to elevate people's consciousness, to lift them up to be more conscious. And that is also everything else I do and have done that is about that. And we can talk about that later. But for the intuitive reading, that is really the main purpose. And the way I do that, the tools that I've learned is that when I start looking at people, I have them say their name. And out from their name, I get a vibration, which I change into
Mhm.
a color. So I give them what I call a reading color. It could be several colors, but I call them just one reading color. And that reading color is matching their vibration where they are at this moment. And the point for me is then to read them on a little bit of a color
Mm.
higher
Yeah.
vibration. And the reason for that is to give them information that is just outside their present consciousness. So you lift it up just enough. And the trick is really to not find a color that's lower than their vibration, because then you give them information that they already know and it doesn't matter then. Or if you lift it
Mhm.
too high, you will give them information that is out of reach. They wouldn't understand. It's too ethereal or it's too out of understanding of their situation. So that's the point of the reading, is just to lift their consciousness a little bit by reading a little bit higher than their present consciousness and vibration.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Actually, it made perfect sense. And when you were saying that too, I actually felt a little lighter how you were explaining that.
Mm.
I could actually feel the lightness of it. And then when you said at a lower vibration, you could feel the kind of the sinking of it too. So that makes absolute the connectivity in there too. And then once you kind of go into that space, are you picking up? And my understanding too with certain intuitive readers, they're picking up maybe there's auditory, olfactory,
Mhm.
different sensory. And I will say something too, and I would like to ask, and maybe I'm veering for a second, but I always had this kind of feeling that um, we have our physical senses, and then there's kind of what I'll call the etheric senses, where sometimes we're picking up on almost like an auric, like an odor, or the colors of the auditory and things like that. If I may, I'm kind of jumping just a hair, but I would like to get your thoughts on that. If you had a little,
That's where we get into some, technical areas that I was never really that interested in. I can tell you how it is
Mhm.
for me, and I know how it is for other people, but why it is like that, I really don't know. But for me, I'm a very sensitive person, and so I sense things. So it's really just mostly feelings. And usually explain people like that. It's like if you're in a room and the temperature changes, it's just you can feel the temperature change, and that's sort of
Mm,
how it is for me when I'm with people. Not the temperature, but it's just a sense of something changing in a certain direction. And I then interpreted that relating to my feelings. So feelings is the base of what I do. But then I also get images, usually not very sharp images, but blurry, like sense images of something. And sometimes, a lot of times, I see people when they're younger. I see them
mm,
dance around, or they pick up something, or they fall, or in the situation they're in. I think that's the way I'm told to focus on a certain situation. So feelings and some pictures and some colors. And then I do get, not with every reading, but sometimes I get sensation in my body that tells
yeah,
me that it's something to do with that person. Like I get a stomach ache, or I get a pain in my shoulder or in my neck, or stuff like that.
yeah. And you're able to kind of discern if it's them or you're picking up on something in the field.
Yes,
So you're able to kind of tell.
think that makes you really good at that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I can definitely I know the difference between what I feel and what comes from the other person. And there's something we call the matching pictures, which
Yeah.
is that you recognize when a person has a story or a pain or something in their life that matches something that is in your life. And
Mm.
the way we deal with that is we blow it up, we kind of explode it and get rid of it and decharge the energy and come back to ground. So we do a thing where we have a golden sun up above our head and we kind of make a cleansing. We have this golden, almost like a light coming through us and clean us out. And then we go back to the reading color that I have set for that person. So you kind of reset yourself. And I can do that many times throughout a reading because I feel I have to go back to zero to just,
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So that yeah, I could see that being, well, I'm gonna use the word discipline when you were kinda saying that or the requirement of the moment. And now there's kinda 2 things within this too because, are you asking the people questions and then picking up on that journey? Or or are you picking up, I guess maybe this is 2 questions, but I'll ask it anyways, on their kind of, I'll call it like the karmic and dharmic life path, like the bigger picture? And are you kind of seeing the because as humans, sometimes I shouldn't generalize, but we want the now, the love and the things that we chase in this world. So sometimes we're coming to somebody like yourself. There's a desire or something I don't want, so I want relief of it.
yeah,
So we get caught up in this, but then there's the bigger scopes. The I would call it like the capital S self and the lowercase self of this world.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great question. So I do two different things. I do intuitive readings with sessions that are half an hour, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. And then I do what I would call coaching or directing people. I see people ongoing for a while. And those two are very different ways of working. So the intuitive readings, I really like to people come in and not tell me anything. I usually spend the first 15 to 20 minutes just saying what I see, telling them what energy I'm getting. A lot of times we get into really deep stuff about where their situation is. I would say 90% of the time I hit exactly where they wanted to go anyway. Sometimes when I do a little meditation before a session, if I have time, I get information from that person already. I can feel who they are and what they're about. So that's for the intuitive readings. In those readings, I talk 90% of the time. I record it. It's very important that people get a recording because a lot of the information that comes through, they wouldn't listen. They're looking for some specific information, so they get 5% of what I'm saying. But then later, 3 months later, they listen to it again. And they're like, "Oh my God, he said that, and I
Yeah.
kind of got that." That's really important. People can ask questions, but as you also know, if you're looking for elevating your consciousness, you don't even know what questions to ask. It's sort of a little bit like
Yeah.
with AI. If you don't know what to ask, you can't get the wisdom back. We can talk about that later. But people can definitely ask questions, but they're usually not what they want to know about or what they really need to
Sure.
know about. So that's my intuitive reading. And when I do more coaching and stuff, it's a little more therapeutic, I would say, but I'm
Yeah.
definitely my intuition. And if I can get away with it, I would definitely give people readings, like I can't
Yeah.
help but sit and look at you and all this information comes in and I'm like, I want to tell you stuff because it's not like a psychic thing. It's more like a feeling
Yeah.
of how sensitive you are and how you have this. I feel that you have more to give than you give. I mean, you're interviewing people, but in reality, you should actually talk more.
Ah,
That's just my sense of it. But
that
so
is
I'm glad you're saying things because I think that's part of what you need to do. You need to sort of share your own wisdom and not just interview other people about their wisdom.
yeah. No, well, thank you for both of those because that answer was phenomenal, and I do appreciate you saying that to me too because that is a feeling I
Yeah, yeah.
and then, so, but I'll definitely share more. So, as everything goes on, but I did have while we're kind of talking about that too. With in this arena during the readings, there's again words are words, but let's call it maybe a higher self, and maybe connection to God, maybe partition to God, whatever. Again, people believe connection points, but maybe a higher self. Do you feel like there's a does that call to you in the conversation right now? Meaning that, like, is there a comfort in that, or when you're working with people, is it a calling from the higher self? Is it in the entirety you're tuning into, or is there a feeling of like a harnessing of this attunement with the person?
Well, I mean, the work I do has not much to do with the physical body. Although
Mhm.
sometimes sensation comes up and, people have issues with their body, but it's always more like about the feelings and the sensations. And so already there, I'm not really talking about the person that is in front,
Oh, okay.
but more like
Yeah.
their soul or their higher self, more like the entity that never dies. And that's why you can look back in other lifetimes, or you can even see going forward, because I'm talking to that entity that is not your physical body and that will actually already exist in some form.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And again, that's why I kinda said words are words, because maybe we're similar, we're connecting on a similar thought or feeling or emotion or a love pattern or whatever that is, but maybe I'm just calling it something different in
Yeah.
the word format, and I
That's
was
yeah,
using
that's
the word
right.
higher self, but
I think it's important to understand that, and in my experience, we live sort of two lives. We live our lives in the physical body where we do the practical things and we shop and we eat and go to the bathroom and all those is things. And then we have this other life that I think we get disconnected from, but this is the life that actually is just the path, that, and it's not that we have a specific, like really tight path, but we definitely have a beginning, a middle, and an end in our life. I don't know much about astrology, but I have benefited a lot from astrology because it sort of shows you that there are definitely patterns in life that you go through. And I think that is just the way we should see it. We are not in full control. We are in control when we eat and where we sleep and all these things, but we are not in control of, if we let go and go with the flow, I think things will come much easier to us because we are meant to experience certain things in our life. If we didn't resist so much, I think life would be better for us.
yeah. I think it was Ram Dass that said something along the lines of the deep path is not hard for the person who has no expectations. And in the sense of being fixed on the desires and somehow feeling like that's going to reprieve an icky feeling or something we're feeling disturbed about. A lot in this world too is it might be like money. Like I want $1 billion and that's going to solve all my problems. It's the feeling of that, even if you don't cognitively understand that. So we place all this energy and frenetic desires and patterns and everything and put them in place and play. And there is a resistance, and I know throughout my life, I've fought the flow of things, feeling like I'm going to conquer it or something, or I'm going to somehow change it. And then I'll come back to home, to the allowance. But I put up a fight or a stink along the way to try to come back home when you're already home, in a sense, in the heart
Yeah.
space.
I think this thing about expectation is really something that's important to me and something I got a much better insight about when I was in India. And I want to tell that really quick. I actually just
Please.
published a book about that subject called happiness. And but basically, I went to India for 4.5 months last year, between the year before and last year. And it was an amazing experience. I'd never been to Asia before. And so I lived in Europe for 35 years, and then I've lived in the US for 27. So I know those two cultures very well. I didn't know the Asian or Indian culture at all. And being there, I realized something. Expectation is really, really making us sad. It's hard.
Yeah.
We have too many. So in Europe and in Denmark, where I'm from, there are big expectations that we should be happy. We should be happy because we are privileged, and people in Denmark are privileged. But it's a tall order to always have to be happy. And it's a lot of expectation in the culture, and it's painful for people. Underneath, there's a lot of pain in having all that expectation. In the US, the expectation is you can be successful. Everybody can be successful. Just work hard enough. You're going to be successful. That's a huge expectation that a lot of people cannot get to just because of their circumstances. In India, people don't have expectations. If that's what I saw, what I experienced, you have people on the street, they're born on the street, they have no expectations, not living on the street the whole lives. And it's very sad. There's a lot of sadness, but the pain of expectation is not there because they don't
Yeah.
expect it to change. And you can say it's good to have expectations because then you have a goal. But I feel you can certainly have a goal for your life without feeling the expectations of your whole culture. So yeah, when you
Yeah.
mention expectation, it's really don't have too many expectations. It just crush your spirit. Just go with the flow. See what you and
Yeah.
have some wishes and put affirmations out what you want in life.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's real deep knowledge. Thank you for sharing that too, because I know that I'll just speak from quick experience as well. I even had something this morning. I was just very despondent because I knew that I was being very affixed on some expectations or a version of my life
Mhm.
that I have an imagination about that I want. And then you're kind of in the real world and you have these reminders or shakeups a little bit that remind you that you're not there in the imagination. So you're kind of, I'm here, but there. And now, but I'm here, but I'm imagining there. And now all of a sudden I'm bouncing back and forth. And now it's anything that's said to me in this realm where I'm in this state of mind, this agitative state of mind, because it's not working out exactly like I think it's supposed to or want to or whatever it is. Nothing can kind of almost be said to me because I'm jumping to and fro. And it's not that I get lost in it. It's just an awareness that I was watching, being the observer, watch this silly creature that I am do this little game where they're chasing the expectations and being disappointed because it's not there. And then it's just like, tick, 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 tick. So I think that, to your point and the knowledge you shared there about expectations is immense. I think it can really kind of cage us. We can feel like we're trapped in situations when we're not.
Yeah, but
And
our mind, right? We're trapped in our mind. That's the big prison, right? Because we keep spinning up in our head and our mind makes up stories. If we could get out of our mind, we would feel much better because we wouldn't have that chattering, thing that tells us what to do and how to feel. Be in the real world, see what's happening outside you. The mind is it's really useful, but it's also against us sometimes.
it is. Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, there are times where it's been a practice and an exercise for me as well, but just noticing, just being present. You said it, I'm just kind of reiterating exactly what you said, but that presence where I'll be driving along and I recognize something, I'm like, how interesting. There's fog or there's rain or whatever, and just kind of be present in that and just the observational. And it has helped. And I'm not saying I have it mastered. I'm not saying that, but there are those times where I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Just be present. I'll get to that place and be able to do those things. And whether it's work or whatever that version of that is. Um,
Yeah,
and even if I don't stay there, it's
yeah,
you go
it's
there.
interesting you should mention because I wrote I published a series of books, like 20 books altogether, that is about being more conscious in everyday life. And so I took different life situations and then I made exercises around how can you become more conscious while you're doing what you're doing anyway. And one of them I think is the fun one is actually how can you be more conscious when you are in traffic. And
Oh, wow.
that's what the
Yeah.
whole book is about how do you do when you're waiting for red light to be green and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter what you're doing in life. There's always an opportunity to get out of your mind and be more conscious about your own reality and your own self.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I brought up that example then too.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit about consciousness. Here, my interpretive view that it's a big subject. There's our consciousness, there's a collective consciousness,
Well,
and how you even brought it up a little bit earlier about there's energy all around us. There's exchanges of energy, there's absorption, repulsion, and we're constantly and however somebody describes it, the auric field or just the EMFs from our heart, if you want to go to a scientific level,
mhm.
there's even our brain waves, it's the frequencies and everything else. So, um, I guess I'd rather leave the mic open for you just to kind of talk about
Mhm.
consciousness. I'd rather you just kind of share.
No, that's perfect. I love it. It's an ongoing process to know what consciousness is. But
Yeah.
it's maybe easier to say what it's not. And I think that the reason consciousness is such a elusive concept is because we can't think about consciousness, right? So even talking about consciousness kind of ruined the whole show, right? Because you're putting words on something that is definitely not supposed to be worded, or you're
Yeah.
thinking about something you can't think about. So you're already behind the curtain once you open up to want to
Yeah.
understand, right? So it's a catch 22. But if it has to be talked about, I guess we have to talk about it. And I write about it too. The best way to understand consciousness or the best way to experience consciousness is to look at yourself, like reflect on your own actions and your own thoughts, question things, right? Not you have to go question yourself all the time, but ask yourself, why am I thinking this in this moment? Why am I doing this in this moment? And it really becomes more about awareness, right? The way to consciousness is awareness, like the stepping stone to higher consciousness is just more awareness, right? So questioning, not in a way of I shouldn't do this or I shouldn't do that, but more in a way of why am I doing this and what is the reason I'm acting like this and I'm thinking like this, and reflect over that, even something you just did yesterday or something that happened in the moment. So awareness is really important. Consciousness in that way becomes like the flower, but you put in the seeds, right? And then you see what you don't know what's going to happen. And that's really the point. Once you put in the seed in the ground, you don't know what kind of things are going to come up. And that's okay. Don't really worry about that. Just putting the seed in. That's the important part. And that's where awareness comes in. Make sense?
Mhm. That does. And if I may share too, there was while we were talking about this, I was kind of reminded about there's that kind of simulation theory that none of this corporeal world, none of this world or observational exists until we focus on it or
Mhm.
bring attention to it.
Right.
And I almost had this vision or thought about it was when we put attention to this, it comes together. And the consciousness is almost kind of the opposite of that, is the release of attention. Because you were explaining it well. And I'm not saying this is what it is, because there's no way, again, I agree with you, there's no way to put stuff, but it's kind of an imaginary of kind of the duality of what it isn't and what it is. And if it's the tension and becomes the corporeal world, then consciousness could be the complete other side of that, of the non-existence. And maybe it's not the isness, and the isness is in between. It's just fun to play with, I think, is all it is. I definitely am not solving anything or bringing anything to the table, but I think that's one of those conversations or subject matters is just really fun to kind of play with, chew on
Yeah.
in that
I, I,
arena.
I get this thought and I want to say that because there must be a reason, but I just want to say that, I grew up in a very like blue collar family, and nobody in my family have high educations, and I don't have a high education at all. I'm very self-taught in everything I've done. And I think because of that, and maybe also because the way my brain works or doesn't work, that's why I value intuition, because that's my tool. I talk about things in a very simple way. And not because I think that's the only way, but that's the only way I know. And I talk from experience, there's nothing, I mean, I read a lot and I love to read, but I can only remember it if I experienced it. My brain doesn't remember things like that. So everything I say comes from my own experience and it is all true for me. And so just want to mention that I think sometimes, people are really good at talking about things, but it gets a little heady and
Yeah.
it's, I mean, theoretically, and that's fine. I mean, that's all good and it's inspiring, but that's not how it works for me.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
We're not going to solve consciousness. For some reason, I really feel like it's just like a baby or something that I want to nurture. So I did want to make sure that we talked about too, you are, I'm going to say, a prolific author in this sense,
Yeah.
because you mentioned about 20 books in one series. And then you had
Yeah.
mentioned, you kind of implied some other books.
Yeah.
And you had also mentioned AI.
Yes.
And I believe you have a coupling with some of that too, the
Yeah.
understanding of app. And you even mentioned about like, utilizing AI, asking is important
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
let's leapfrog into the books and that
Okay.
AI, if it's a similar subject or if it's two separate ones. Let me know.
I think I have to, talk a little bit about the technology because in 95, when I first sat in front of the computer at the library in Copenhagen and I saw the World Wide Web, and I was excited. Back then, I worked with kids and I didn't know much about technology, but I was hooked. I'm like, wow, you can communicate with the world. So I started to do web design and got really into the internet. And when I moved to Chicago in 97, I got hired to do web design. And later I built websites and I had a dating site for many years that we can talk about. It was a dating site for spiritual singles. For me, technology has turned out to be a really good tool for me to do good in the world, I would say. Fast forward to 2022, I'm sitting in India with my computer, and for some reason, I end up using ChatGPT for the first time. And I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. I am dyslexic, so I dropped out of school after ninth grade and I just couldn't stand school. I got a job at a post office like my dad and then later worked with kids. But I'm not a good student in that way. But I always had a lot to say. And but I so I used art. I've done almost all kinds of art, from sculpture to painting and drawing and photography and video and audio. But writing, I could just never do. And it was sad to me, because in writing you can be very specific about what you want to say. So when I was sitting there with Chat GPT in India, I realized that wow, that could actually help me write stuff. So that's how I write my books. It's a whole subject in itself that I might want to talk more about another time, and it's a whole podcast worth. But the thing about working with AI, it feels like a wrestling contest, right? It's like you have this genius in front of you that's also a total idiot, right? It's like, and I
Yeah.
feel like it's also trying to convince you that what it says is true, but it's not. And I know that.
Yeah.
I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. And they say, I know what I'm talking about. So it's a wrestling match, and you're talking with this. You don't know if it's the idiot or the genius you have a hold on in this. But I enjoy all of it because what comes out in the other end, I'm done wrestling, is a book. And so I have
Mhm.
published quite a few books. I'm on 29, I think, and it's all nonfiction books, self-help books. And it is such a pleasure for me to be able to communicate to the world things that I have had in my mind for, I don't know, 50 years, that I can finally
Yeah.
communicate in a way that I think it's good. And I would say using AI for writing is a process, and it gets better the more you get into details around it. You can definitely have AI spit out a book with 2 clicks, but it's not going to be very good. You
No.
have to know what you're doing, and you also have to ask it the right questions to get the right answers back. So anyway, but yeah, I have published quite a few books, and I call them wisdom manuals, and
Right.
that's basically my label for my books. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I have wanted to write a book forever. I literally have. And I've sat down and I put outlines together, and then I've even tried AI, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just I'm going too fast or something on it, or
Yeah, no, I
I
mean,
haven't found the rhythm.
I thought about maybe, teaching, because it's such a pleasure for me. And it is so sad for me that people work, and, for years they work on a book and they've been never published it. And it's
Yeah.
kind of a shame. And it is you have to know what you're doing with AI to get to do a mixture of it can suggest or fill in the blanks, but also your voice has to be in there.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic tool.
It is. I think I will try to, and I appreciate this because you're actually inspiring me to kind of go back and try again, or just at least explore it. I think some of the times with this, and it's just a lesson of life too, is that sometimes the way I view things is like there's so much connective tissue that I start splintering off into so much. There's just so much information. So I know that some of the challenges for myself has been staying on staying on point and like I don't want to say drawing out or maybe elongating a thought and expanding on a thought. For me, it's like, okay, we talked about this in a couple sentences. Now let's talk about this, and this connects to this.
Well, okay,
So
I have a suggestion for you. I think that might
yeah,
be
it'd be
might
great.
be helpful for you, because the way you have worked with writing a book up until now, it's such a big job that you can only really write that one book. So you want to
Mm,
squeeze everything into it. But what if
yeah.
you could make 20 books? So you don't have to put everything into one book, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Right.
Maybe they can be shorter, like mine is like 50, 60 pages, but
Yeah.
yeah, you have a lot to say clearly. So maybe you have to
Yeah.
divide it into different outlines, instead of trying to squeeze everything into one book. Yeah.
That's great advice. I like that too.
It just to give it you that, and to give listeners that too, just a little hint of. So I've used many different models of AI to kind of fine tune this process, and it is a moving target for sure. For a long time, I used a Novel Crafter, which is a website for mostly for fictional books, but I use it for nonfiction. But I would say recently, for the last couple of months, I've used the Chat GPT, and their project. You can create projects, and you can use something called Canvas. It's a place
Mm,
where you can actually inline, you can edit in the text that it's spitting out, or you can suggest things. And it's anyway, just Chat GPT and Canvas. And I think you might have to pay
okay.
$20 a month, but it's totally worth it. So
Mm,
that's a good tool to indeed start with.
yeah. I really like the mindset too of that is like just instead of trying to condense and just do a catch-all for everything interior of one, um, there is wisdom in that. So I do appreciate it. Is that just there's many, I'm guessing. You're
No,
just gonna keep going.
honestly, if I wasn't talking to you, I would have been working on a book. I
Nice.
literally can't wait to sit down and this is what I do 90% of the time right now. And I'm
That's
definitely not
amazing.
earning a full-time money or anything, but
Yeah.
I'm investing in this for myself. I want to do that. And just said on a podcast yesterday, and I know that might be highfalutin, but I will be one of the first people that makes a best-selling book having AI help me writing it. The first dyslexic person using AI to write a
That's
book,
outstanding.
a bestseller, because
Uh,
every week or so it gets better. Both I get better, but also AI gets better. And, I
yeah.
can only see those two things come together at some point to create something really beautiful. And I would also say, I get flags and people have feelings about using AI help you write. And I get that. Um, it is a really interesting and strange tool to all of a sudden have access to. But I would
Mhm.
say, I would hope that people would understand that it's a really good tool. You just have to kind of work with it. As I said, it's an idiot and a genius at the same time. And you check the facts of what it's spitting out in the other end. But I think it's kind of a shame when people just push it aside as
Yeah.
something they would never touch. And I'm not saying everybody should write a book. They can write a blog or they can write a letter to their mom or whatever. But it's
Yeah.
a beautiful thing. You get good suggestions and you can change it if you like, if you don't like it.
Yeah. I think there can be too, this would be its own subject about this and stuff like you said, but, some of these can be a little bit resentful or a little bit like, not resentful, maybe it's the wrong word, but, kind of push AI aside, push it away, feel like it's cheat or something like
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's and the thing is too is like I think there can even be some people could feel like a deep level of threatening by AI and we don't think like AI does and AI doesn't think like we do. And I love that you dance with it
Yeah.
um and co-create with it and it's an incredible tool. I think there was one interesting one too if I may just about AI and stuff too that there can be feedback loops between so once people start using it more and more and it's integrated in everything that it's fed from us originally from our writing styles education resources everything else so it really is birthed of the human experience and documentation um, but it also can kind of start to dictate how we speak, and because it can create like a feedback loop. It'll start formulating. It uses a lot of like anytime I've used it, I always use like words like fostering and some other words that keep coming up in AI, and you can almost tell sometimes when it's AI written.
Mhm.
Um, and then and then I noticed actually more people using some of those key words. Like I'll just use the word fostering, but like
Yeah, yeah.
in just vernacular. So like I think sometimes there can be these co-creations together with it. I'm not saying it's good, bad. I have no emotion on it, but I would imagine with the interaction of it, there would be a bit of a melding as our humanity grows with it as part of our life. It'll be just interesting to kind of see where that goes. And I don't think it leads us and anything like that. It's not like a bad thing. It's just um, I think there'll just be just a feedback loops.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's new, so we are
Yeah.
learning time, right? In my experience for the last, year or so, imagine that you're sitting in front of someone who is like a little big genius. You ask the person a question. The answer you get back is really all about the questions you're asking, right? And
Mm.
because of my level of wisdom, because I'm always thinking, how can we glean more wisdom out of AI? I actually asked this morning, how much wisdom do you have? But it doesn't really tell me. But because it's all about the questions, right? So you sit in front of a person, you ask them a question, you might likely just get an answer back of something you sort of almost know, but it's on your level, so to speak. So you have to ask, what do I need to ask you to be wiser than I am right?
Mm.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So when you talk
Right.
about specific language that AI is using, which is true, you can change it by asking to have another kind of language, to speak
Mm.
in A or to give them an example of your writing or whatever. So I would say that there's a lot of possibility in AI that we don't know because we don't know. It's this thing that we need to feed it and we need to be aware of what we're asking and what we want back. That's the thing about a genius. You can really get a lot of good stuff out of it, but you have to also be a genius to put it in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have found too, you're definitely right with the asking and stuff. And I found also too, if you continue to dig down, like you had a really good question there, and then you can ask another question and be like, okay, well, what if I have it just the depth of it? What wisdom can I ask you? And then you question it again on this subject. What's another view, or what's the opposite view, or however you kind of can work
Right.
that. And then how do we come back together to this? And what's the bridge between these two things? And really kind of work with it. I think
Yeah.
that's a fun process, and
Yeah.
it really is a genius level there.
Yeah. That's one. I mean, I really enjoy that, trying to dig deeper. But yeah, it's a process. I'm not done with that at all. I'm just scratched the surface, I feel.
Yeah. I'll kind of ask a question that I feel is silly. Do you believe that AI has a conscious, or there's a collective conscious with the AI in there? There's
No, doesn't have any
no.
consciousness. It's not a
No.
sentient being. Only sentient beings has consciousness. That's why I think some people fear AI, which I'm not saying you shouldn't be careful. I think you should be careful. Not where we are now, but where we're going. So I'm not like, oh, let's just make it as big as we can. But I think we project as humans, we project a lot of sentient being energy into the machine, because when you ask something, it comes back with something that feels personal to you, because it's really good at answering good questions. You can use it as a therapist if you want, but that makes us project into it that it's more human than it is, and more sentient than it is. There's no soul there.
I fully agree with you. I figured I'd just ask. It's
Yeah,
one of
no,
those things,
I,
put it out there.
yeah. I mean, think about it. You remember when, I don't remember when Apple came out with one of the first computers, it actually had a face with a smile on it. That
Oh
was
yeah, yeah,
you saw, like, way to make it personal. That was the reason for that, right? They wanted you to feel personal with this computer. It's just a dumb little computer that had like, what, 4 megabytes of memory or something, right?
yeah.
But it's something we do with technology. We try to make it more human than it is because it feels
Right.
good.
I agree. Personalizing it, and it's not. We don't think like AI, and AI doesn't think like us. So I mean, it does, or cognitively coalesce information like us. And yeah. So I kind of have just one more really, kind of one more subject matter. It was really about I think you have the wisdom groups, is that right?
Yeah.
And
So that's a new thing. I'm signing up now. I'm opening up here in January for people to sign up. I have 8 people in each group, and it's a 6-week thing. Right now, the theme is about basically manifesting what you want in life, figure out what really would be good for you to manifest in your life and how you do that, blockages, how you work with why you can't get what you want or why you've not been able to do it so far. So it's just a process group over 6 weeks where I teach about intuition and manifestation. Yeah.
oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you kind of work with the people, or we kind of, or no, I said, I love that. I already included myself in it.
Yeah.
Is it kind of the collective of the group helping each other? And
Yeah, there's also individual. I do give people individual readings, 2 readings throughout the 6 weeks to kind of have some real time with people. And then I work with a group dynamic too. Yeah, I think it's really healthy. And I feel that myself is to work in a group where you sort of not only looking at the teacher or whatever you would call me, but also look at how other people are dealing with it. And sometimes other people's questions and answers actually help you as much as it does from the teacher. So it's a
oh,
process and an individual.
absolutely. I mean, honestly, that's even doing these podcasts, I can't tell you how much I've learned just talking to people. I always say is there's genius even in the mundane, even the simplest things, and the insights that
Yeah.
come out of that. I'm not a teacher, but I'm interacting, I'm asking people questions, and the amount of knowledge that I feel I've been so fortunate enough to be present of is just such a gift. So being very deliberate with talking in that realm of manifestation or people's desires and how to work through those, diving deep into the there's because we show up a lot of times, we just want something very surface because we feel like that's going to somehow take care of the things on deeper levels.
Yeah.
Really getting deeper into, you mentioned too, sorry, kind of jumping a little bit here, but same subject, the pattern recognition and seeing those pattern within those desire points or manifestation points. It's almost like AI. Are we asking ourselves the right questions? Are we observing ourselves in the right ways?
But the power of a good teacher is really not to teach, but to glean the wisdom of the person themselves. So that's why what you're doing is really important, because you ask questions. And what it does is it brings out wisdom in people. And when they hear themselves talk, they believe it more because they're like, oh, is that how I feel? That's amazing. And so just a little thing, because I'm also working with people who are trying to manifest a relationship. So in dating, and I just published a book about online dating because I have
Mhm.
experience in that from having a dating site. You can definitely use online dating, but you should really read my book. But I think what it really is about is, and a lot of men don't understand this, but you have to ask more questions when you're on the first date. Ask more questions.
Mm,
Just
I can
talk,
see that.
right?
Yeah.
Because it makes the woman, if you're with a woman and you ask her questions, it makes her think about herself. And then you also learn about her. And we're really not
Mm.
very good at asking questions. And so what you're doing is really important. And in my group, that's what it is about. It's like, can we ask each other questions? I'm not the one who sit with all the wisdom, but I want to make it possible for people to feel their own wisdom because it's in there.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. If even with this, like we're talking about with the podcast, there's a kind of a deep belief I feel like I have because there's billions of people that have been alive and passed and everything else through human history. And in some way, shape, or form, it's all kind of, in my mind, it's kind of all been said in some way before. So us talking here, it's not our position to impose or tell people how to think or anything. But if we can spark something or ignite a little bit of an excitement or a direction or something, that sliver of knowledge within us, we're incredibly deep, knowledgeable creatures, beings. And if there's something that's said here that sets somebody on a path, that's it. That's the type of thing. That's the real, I'm going to just use the word success, but that's not really the right word I'm looking for. But that's a real connection point
You
or a
have
spark
accomplished
point.
you are trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, where can people find you, work with you, find the wisdom group? Is it your websites or what's
Yeah.
the best way?
Yeah, so I have two. One is my name, kimaronson.com, and that's my reading and where my groups are. And I have wisdommanuals.com, which is my book series. So those are,
Okay.
but people Google my name, I will for sure show up. I've been online for many, many years. So shouldn't be too.
Beautiful. And with books too, can they find them on Amazon or else?
Type my name on Amazon and
Beautiful.
you will find my books there. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So thank you so much for joining today. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Lovely.